was one of those nights where the world goes silent. Snow fell thick and heavy, blanketing everything in white. The kind of storm that makes even the bravest stay inside. The wind howled through the trees, and every window in the small mountain town rattled as if the earth itself was shivering. In a tiny wooden cabin at the end of Miller Road, an old lady named Martha Jenkins sat by her fireplace knitting quietly. She lived alone, had for nearly 20 years, ever since her husband passed away. Her children had long moved to the city, and all she had left were her books, her old cat Pumpkin, and her memories. That night, as she poured herself a cup of tea, she heard it, a low rumbling sound. Faint at first, then louder, the sound of engines, heavy, growling motorcycles fighting through the storm. She stood up, startled. Who would be out there in weather like this? Moments later, headlights appeared through the swirling snow, one after another. 15, maybe more. The noise shook her porch. Then came the knock. Martha hesitated. 15 large figures wearing black leather jackets with patches that read, Hell's Angels. Her heart skipped a beat. She'd heard stories about them, wild stories, outlaws, rebels, dangerous men, and now they were at her door. She could have locked it. She could have stayed quiet, but something in her heart whispered, they need help. So she opened the door. The leader, a tall man with a gray beard and eyes that looked like he'd seen too many winters, spoke softly. Ma'am, I'm sorry to bother you. We got caught in this storm. The highway's blocked. We've got nowhere to go. Martha looked past him. The men were covered in snow, shivering. One of them was limping. Another was holding his arm close as if hurt. Their bikes were already half buried in the white wind. She nodded slowly. Well, don't just stand there. You'll freeze to death. Come in, all of you. They looked surprised. Then, one by one, they stepped inside. For the next few hours, her little cabin came alive. The men crowded around the fire, their leather jackets steaming as the snow melted off them. Martha brought out every blanket she owned, poured hot tea, and even made soup from what little she had in her pantry. They tried to protest, said they couldn't take her food, but she just smiled and said, Don't argue with a lady in her own home. The storm outside grew worse, but inside there was warmth, not just from the fire, but from something else, something human. One of the younger bikers, barely 30, noticed a picture on her wall. A man in a soldier's uniform. Your husband? He asked. She nodded. Yes, fought in Korea, never came back the same. The man looked down. My dad was in Vietnam. Didn't come back at all. For a moment there was silence, the kind that connects people without words. As midnight passed, they told stories. She told them about her small town life. They told her about the road, the miles, the freedom, the pain, and the brotherhood. The leader, whose name was Bear, stayed quiet most of the time. But before they slept, he said softly, Ma'am, you didn't have to do this. People see our jackets and lock their doors. She smiled. I don't see jackets. I see people. By morning, the storm had passed. The sun rose over the snow-covered hills, painting everything gold. The angels cleaned her porch, shoveled her driveway, and fixed her broken fence before leaving. Bear shook her hand and said, If you ever need us, just call this number. He handed her a small card with a red-winged skull on it. She chuckled. I don't think I'll be needing bikers anytime soon. They laughed, revved their engines, and disappeared down the road. Days passed, then weeks. Martha went back to her quiet life until one morning, a month later, she heard it again, that same rumbling sound. Louder this time, much louder. She opened her door and gasped. Down her little road, lined up neatly in both directions, were over 100 motorcycles, engines rumbling. Men and women standing beside them. At the front was Bear, holding a bouquet of white roses. Behind him, several bikers carried boxes and supplies. Food, firewood, repairs for her cabin, and a brand new generator. Bear stepped forward. We heard your roof's been leaking. We came to fix it. Martha was speechless. Tears welled up in her eyes as she whispered, Why would you all do this? Bear smiled. That same quiet smile she'd seen by the fire. Because kindness deserves company. You helped 15 of us that night. Today, 100 came to thank you. For 2 days straight, the Hell's Angels worked around her home. They repaired her roof, painted her porch, and installed new windows. Some cooked meals. Others chopped wood. The little cabin that once stood silent now buzzed with laughter, music, and life. When they were done, Bear handed her a leather jacket. Custom made, small, with her name stitched on it, Mama Angel. She put it on, laughing through her tears. "You boys are something else." Before they left, Bear said, "You reminded us what respect feels like, ma'am. We'll never forget it." And as they rode away, the sound of 100 engines echoed through the valley, not as noise, but as a symphony of gratitude. Months later, local news picked up the story. Elderly woman shelters biker gang during storm becomes an honorary member of the Hells Angels. But Martha didn't care about fame or stories. Every now and then, she'd just sit by her fireplace, run her fingers across the leather jacket, and smile. Because in a world that often judges by appearances, she had found something real, proof that kindness still has power, proof that hearts, no matter how rough they look on the outside, can still shine with love inside. And on quiet nights, when the wind blew through the hills, she swore she could still hear it, the distant, familiar rumble of engines, and the sound of 100 angels on wheels riding through the snow. The snow had melted weeks ago, but the memory of that day still lived in Martha Jenkins' heart like a warm flame. Her porch, once broken and faded, now gleamed with new wood and fresh paint. Her leaky roof no longer dripped during the rain, and hanging on her coat rack, right next to her husband's old army jacket, was a small black leather vest hung with golden letters that read, Mama Angel. Sometimes, when she lit her fireplace, she would run her fingers along the leather, smile and whisper to herself, "I never thought I'd have sons again, but I do now." The quiet of her life was no longer lonely. Every few weeks, a roar of engines would echo down Miller Road. 3 or 4 bikers would show up, bringing supplies, chopping wood, or simply checking in. They called her Mama, brought her food, and filled her home with laughter. To the town, it was strange and even unbelievable. The same Hells Angels that once scared everyone now brought groceries to a frail old woman's cabin. But Martha didn't care what people said. She had seen the truth in their eyes, beneath the tattoos, the scars, and the leather. Hearts that remembered kindness. It was early spring when Martha felt it, a dull pain in her chest that refused to go away. At first, she ignored it. "It's just old age," she told herself. But the pain grew stronger. Some days it felt like her heart was caught in a vice. One morning she was watering her plants when her vision blurred. The watering can slipped from her hand, clattering to the floor. When she opened her eyes, she was lying on the ground, unable to move, whispering. Hours passed before someone found her. It was Danny, one of the younger bikers who came by on his usual visit. He burst through the door, found her collapsed by the window, and shouted her name. Within minutes he had her in his arms, racing down the mountain on his Harley with her head resting against his chest. That night in the small-town hospital, a nurse asked Danny, "Are you her son?" He looked down at his leather vest and nodded. "Yes, ma'am. All 100 of us are." Within hours, word spread through the biker network. Phones buzzed. Engines roared to life across states. From Colorado, Arizona, Nevada, the Hells Angels came. By the next morning, the hospital parking lot was filled with over 70 motorcycles, gleaming chrome, black leather, and the sound of unity. People stopped to stare. The hospital staff looked nervous at first, until they saw what those men were doing. They took shifts watching her room. They bought flowers, paid her bills, brought her food, and even donated blood, just in case she needed it. Inside her hospital room, Martha slowly opened her eyes to the sound of muffled engines outside. The first thing she saw was Danny, sitting by her bed, holding her hand. "Hey, Mama Angel," he said softly. "You scared the hell out of us." She smiled weakly. "I told you boys not to make a fuss," Danny grinned. Too late for that. The boys from 6 states just showed up. For weeks, the Hells Angels rotated like clockwork. Some brought meals. Some stayed the night in the hospital lounge. One even read her stories when she couldn't sleep. Doctor said she had suffered a mild heart attack. She needed rest and company. Luckily, she had plenty of that. Even the nurses started calling her Mama Angel. She'd tell them jokes, share stories from her youth, and remind everyone, don't judge people by their jackets. Leather doesn't make a man cold.
His heart does. One night, Bear and the leader hun came to visit. He walked in quietly,
carrying a small box. "Mama," he said, We made something for you." He opened the box to reveal a silver pendant shaped like a winged heart, engraved with the words, "Forever our angel." Martha's eyes glistened. "You boys don't owe me anything." Bear knelt beside her bed, his voice breaking slightly. "Mama, you gave us a place when the world gave us none. You saw good in us when no one else would. We ain't letting you go that easy." She reached out, touched his cheek, and whispered, "Then promise me something. Bear, promise me you'll always help people who need it, no matter who they are." Bear nodded. "You got my word, Mama." A local journalist caught wind of the story, and an old woman, a feared biker gang, and a bond stronger than family. The article went viral overnight. The Mother of Angels. How one woman changed the heart of a brotherhood. Soon, cameras showed up. News anchors tried to find Martha, but the angels protected her privacy fiercely. "No interviews," Bear told them.
She's family, not a headline. Still, people across the country were moved.
Letters poured in, hundreds of them. Some from widows, some from veterans. Some from people who had once feared the Hells Angels but now saw something human in them. The Brotherhood began organizing charity rides, in Martha's name. They called it the Angel Run. Every year, they rode across towns, delivering food to the elderly, fixing homes, and donating to hospitals. Each rider wore a small patch on their jacket, "Mama Angel Ride," in kindness. We roll. Martha didn't know at first. She only found out when the bikers surprised her with a framed newspaper photo, a line of 200 bikes under a banner that read, "For Mama." She cried, not out of sadness, but pride, because she realized that her one act of kindness had become a chain reaction, a ripple that touched countless lives. Years passed. Seasons came and went. Martha grew older, frailer, but her spirit remained strong. Every now and then, she'd sit on her porch watching the road, waiting for the familiar rumble that always made her smile. Then, one autumn evening, as the sun dipped below the hills, the engines came again, dozens of them, glowing headlights snaking down the valley. Bear led the pack, his beard now streaked with silver. He parked his bike, took off his helmet, and smiled. "Mama," he said, "we brought you something special." Behind him, two bikers carried a wooden box. When they opened it, Martha gasped. Inside was a miniature Harley-Davidson, handcrafted in silver and gold, sitting on a plaque that read, "The road ends, but the love rides on." She touched it gently, tears rolling down her wrinkled cheeks. "You boys never forget, do you?" Bear smiled softly. "How could we? You're our home base." That night, they all sat around a bonfire outside her cabin. They cooked, laughed, shared stories, some old, some new. And for a moment, time seemed to stop. Martha looked around at the faces illuminated by the firelight, men who once were strangers, now her sons. She whispered, almost to herself, "If my George could see this, he'd be proud of you all." Winter came again, and this time, it was harsh, colder than the one years before. When Danny came to visit one morning, the house was quiet. The fire had burned out, and there, in her armchair wrapped in her Mama Angel jacket, Martha sat peacefully, eyes closed, a faint smile on her lips. On the table beside her was a handwritten note. "Don't cry for me, my boys. Keep riding. Keep helping. I'll be watching, right behind your headlights." Danny couldn't speak. His hands trembled as he picked up the note. Then he stepped outside and dialed Bear. Within hours, the mountains echoed again, the sound of engines, not for a ride, but for a farewell. Over 200 bikers came from across the country. They lined up their bikes outside her cabin, engines rumbling softly like a prayer. Bear placed her jacket over her casket. Danny placed her pendant, the winged heart, over her hands. When they rode out, the sky broke open with snow just like that first night. But this time, it didn't feel cold. It felt like a blessing. Months later, the Hells Angels built a small stone monument near her cabin. On it was carved her favorite saying, "Kindness doesn't need wings, just wheels willing to go the distance." Every year after that, they gathered at the site, engines off, helmets off, heads bowed. They'd lay a white rose on the stone and whisper, "Ride with us, Mama." And when the engine started again, the sound rose like thunder through the valley. Not wild, not angry, but alive. because love, like the road, never really ends. Some say that on quiet winter nights, if you listen closely, you can still hear the faint echo of an old woman's laughter carried by the wind, and the distant roar of 100 bikes riding for her, their mama angel,